Welcome to the Fighting on Film podcast, the podcast all about classic and obscure war movies, from the Normandy landings to the days of chivalry and swords. If it's been captured on film, we're going to try and cover it. I'm Robbie of RM Military History.
I'm Matthew Moss of Historical Firearms and the Armourer's Bench. Hello, welcome back to Fighting on Film. This week we are thrilled to be joined again by legendary military film advisor Dale Dye. Dale is joining us today to talk about his work on Masters of the Air. Dale, welcome. It's great to have you back on the show.
Thanks. It's always great to be with you guys. And particularly, I feel like I'm home talking to home. I spent 10.5 months over there.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Right. Well, that leads us in, really nicely. The first question that I have is, did you and your team run your sort of classic boot camp? Because obviously the cast's roles as US Army Air Force crews are arguably much less physical than, say, the infantry that were in Saving Private Ryan or Band of Brothers. So what sort of things did you do with the cast to bring them into that military mindset?
Well, we were a little worried at first, to be honest with you, because part of our full immersion style of doing these things is to own these guys for 24 hours a day.
Yeah,
we couldn't do that because of the pressure of production time and a number of other things. The more I got to thinking about it with my executive officer, we talked about it. We said, wait a minute, it actually works if you think about it this way. Guys who flew from UK over Nazi-occupied Europe during World War II flew for 8 or 10-hour missions, and then they would return to base and live what in those days could be viewed as relatively sedate existence. So let's use that. Rather than insisting that the guys stay with us 24 hours, we'll deal with them for about 12, 14 hours a day. Then we'll let them go and do what the guys in the 8th Air Force did. They go to the pub, they go to the club, they do whatever they can.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I said, let's use that experience. And so we did. We were intense in our preparation. We did what we usually do. We did our standard physical training, which is to get them focused and aware that this is a bigger deal than themselves individually. And then we adopted a kind of what I would call a crawl, walk, and then run methodology. So we started with the minutest of details. What is your uniform like, and how do you have to wear it, and how do you get that 50 mission crush in your hat? Right. And then we moved on from there into specifics about the organization of the 8th Air Force, about Thorpe Abbotts and other former RAF bases in West Anglia, and then or East Anglia, and then we began to talk about the B-17, the Flying Fortress, the various positions, the various responsibilities. And we did that for 2 solid weeks with upwards of 100 guys in the cast. So it was a tough teaching task. It's always tough when you're in a classroom. But we used as many visual aids as we could. The prop guys and set designers were great. They let us borrow stuff like dummy bombs and fuses and that sort of thing. Cool. So we were able to, I think in the 2 weeks we were given, at the rate of about 12 or 14 hours a day, we were able to cram a lot into that particular program. At the same time, let the guys decompress once they were released for the day, just as a bomber crew, assuming they made it back to UK, just as a bomber crew was able to do in World War II. So that was kind of our approach.
Wow, yeah. So my next question really leads from that, really. Is there anyone out of the main cast that surprised you in terms of getting into like the role and the mindset of an 8th Air Force crewman, bomber crewman?
They all did very well, frankly. Yeah. Look, I knew who they were because I had done my research and that sort of thing. I knew who Callum Turner was, and I knew that we'd have to focus on him, watch his British accent and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
One of the things that I worried about was here we had Austin Butler, playing Major Gail Clevin, who is best known to audiences worldwide for portraying Elvis. And he did a beautiful job, I thought, in that particular film. And I said, but how do I take Elvis and get him into a 1940s mindset and get him into a B-17 pilot situation? Frankly, he did great. I kept watching him to see if, he'd say, "Thank you very much," something that was so Elvis.
Slip into it, yeah.
It absolutely, but he just stepped right up. And when he sets his mind to it, he becomes the character that he was due to portray. And he did very well.
Yeah, he's one of the standouts, I think, in the cast. He did a very good job.
I mean, they're all pretty great, aren't they? I mean,
yeah,
you're instantly in those cockpits with them when they're on a mission. They do bring you into the scenes. So Dale, you've worked on dozens of movies depicting countless historical periods, and I know that you always do a hell of a lot of research when you go into these projects. But just how familiar were you with the sort of experiences of the U.S. Army Air Force during the war?
Well, look, I'm very fortunate to be pretty well plugged into the military establishment and the historian establishments around the world. So I was able to get access to some genuine training manuals, as well as literally hundreds of memoirs of 8th Air Force air crewmen, bomber air crewmen, B-17 crewmen. And of course, we had Don Miller's great book as sort of a touchstone.
Yeah.
But we have to, as we often do when we're doing World War II productions, we had to get into that mentality ourselves. I mean, hell, I think I was the only guy there, other than my exo, that was even born during World War II. And so we had to, and that shows you how old I am, and let's not go there. But at any rate,
no.
But I found myself reading these things and said, boy, if we were to take this manual about how to be an air gunner and present it to a kid today in British forces or in the U.S. forces and say, okay, here's everything you need to know, we'd be laughed off the base. I mean, this stuff seems, in a very patriotic, flag-waving fashion, this stuff seems difficult for today's sort of, candid guys to look at and say, well, are they really like that? Yeah, they were. Mm-hmm. And that was the mentality. And we had to put ourselves in that mentality when we were teaching so that we would demonstrate as we taught and as we demonstrated, we would show them that this is a mentality that these people lived with. And it's how they grew up. It was how they were raised. And this is what we expect you to adopt. And that was a difficult hurdle to get over.
Mm. Yeah. But I think it shows in the show that you did, because you suspend your sort of, I'm not watching Hollywood actors anymore, I'm watching a bomber crew. I think it, over the course of the first 3 episodes, I think it does get that across.
Yeah, one of the things that was difficult. We are much more profane in our speech than they were in World War II in the days of the 1940s. So getting a young actor to say something like "gee whiz" rather than "son of a bitch" is difficult. But you got to get them there, and you've got to make them feel that that's okay. They're not being cheesy, they're not being corny. It's just the way people spoke. So we always had that challenge in front of us.
Yeah, there's that scene where Crosby, after he thought he got hit, isn't he? And he goes, "Oh, gee whiz, Cros, I thought you'd bought it." It's a great line. He delivers it. It's a funny line. It's good.
But you've got to say it believably.
Yeah, with conviction, of course.
Yeah.
This is our first question from one of our listeners, Chris Richards. He, in fact, was an extra on the show, and he asked us to say thank you for helping him with the stretcher bearing scene on the show. passes on his regards. But he asks, was there anything that you discovered researching in the build-up to advising on the series or in the production itself that really sort of struck you or stood by you during the production?
There were literally hundreds of things. And by the way, my compliments on how well he learned that stretcher scene. I remember exactly what he was talking about. It was
fantastic.
very difficult. Full of wounded man. It was like a piece of floppy sausage pulling him out of that aircraft, and we had to very carefully rehearse that. And he was part of it, and I appreciate it.
Great.
But there were hundreds of things that I immediately had these epiphany moments about. Standing outside of B-17, it looks huge. 4 big engines, and oh my God, it's just a monster. But then you get inside it, and it's like a damn sardine can. You know, it's cramped in there, and it's hard to move around. And because it was really a bomb truck, it was designed to carry bombs, and everything else was sort of ancillary. So that kind of affected me. And then it occurred to me as we began to train that a bomber crew, 10 men in a B-17, could actually be divided kind of like football. I'm going to talk about American football here, but it was the offense guys, and that's the bombardier, the navigator, the radio operator, the pilot, the co-pilot. Those they play offense, get us there, drop the bombs, and then there's the defensive team that comes on the field, and that's the tail gunner, the 2 waist gunners, the ball turret gunner, the top turret gunner, who's also the flight engineer. And so we had to think in terms of offensive and defense. I began to think of it like American football a little bit. That was an epiphany. And the other thing that got me, and I fell back on my own experiences in combat a little bit with this. And I said, it's amazing to me. These guys take off from some base in East Anglia, in our case with the Bloody 100s, Thorpe Abbots, which are set designers, by the way, created down to the absolute T. It's
the
great.
bar especially is amazing.
Incredible.
Yeah, out near Devon Barracks. And and I thought, well, what we've got here are 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old men who know damn well after the first couple of missions that the odds are against them. They're stacked against them, and they've seen this horrible death in the air where a bomber just disintegrates, or nobody can get out of it because it's in that death spiral. They return, assuming they do, they return to East Anglia, and they know that they got to do it again. They got to do it the next day. There's a certain mindset in there. And I thought to myself, on the times that I've been able to sleep a little bit in combat, and I thought, when I wake up, I got to do it again. I got to do it again. And I might not survive the next time. And so we tried to preach that a bit. We tried to say, look, put yourself in a sort of a doomed mindset. The odds are against you, but you are courageous enough, you are brave enough to challenge those odds every day to take off into combat and try to get a mission done. Why? Simply because it's the right thing to do in a world at war. It's good versus evil in those days. And that should be clear in your mind. And especially with guys like Crosby and Rosenthal, we had to get that through to them because the instinct is to say nobody would think that way. Yeah, they did. And fortunately, we still have a few around who think that way.
Yeah.
And they serve our nations.
No, without a doubt. My next question is, what for you was the most challenging part of your role on set? Is there anything that jumps out that was saying, oh boy, that was a tough one? Well,
the tough one was, as you probably know at this point, special effects are absolutely the star of the show. And that's as it should be. But what got me, now I'm an actor and I've worked against green screen and that sort of thing, where
absolutely
the computer generates an image behind you and that sort of thing. But in this case, because of the advance in the technology, we had surround green screen. Only it wasn't green screen; it was live action stuff.
Yeah.
That literally, a pilot in a mock-up cockpit looked around, and here was those aircraft. It wasn't, and it was in a multi-dimensional sort of presentation.
Yeah.
So I would sit there daily and say, how in the hell do they do that? But the neat thing was it really helped the performers. It really helped the actors, because once they were in that cockpit mock-up on a gimbal, which would allow it to turn, then the technicians could synchronize what was happening behind them to what was supposed to be happening in the script. So really, it was like being there in live action. And that just absolutely blew my mind. The other challenge, I guess, was that, as usual in one of these things, we had hot and cold running directors. Here'd come this guy, here'd come this gal, here'd come this guy. And part of my mission was to make sure that they understood what had been done before and what could be done. So that I was kind of have to be at their elbow all the time and tugging on it, say, wait a minute, no, you can't do that because the last time we did this. And that presented a challenge. But I think the great thing about it was all of the directors came in understanding that they were on the capstone of the Spielberg-Hanks trilogy, World War II trilogy. Started with Band of Brothers and then with the Pacific, and now Masters of the Air, or the aviation air war, the war in the air in World War II in aviation. And so they were all very anxious, very keen to do the right thing. So you didn't find anybody pushing back all the time and saying, well, yes, but I love this camera angle. Okay, yeah, but you can't do that because of this thing. So all the directors were really keen to get it right, and they worked hard on it.
Yeah, it shows. It doesn't seem like someone's come in and they've changed the shots or changed the makeup of an episode. It does feel everyone's working to the same.
It has that continuity. Yeah.
Yeah, it feels cohesive, doesn't it? Because you have those first 4 episodes with Carrie, and then you've got a couple of other people that have 1 or 2 episodes, and I think there's one that has one director that has a single episode. So you mentioned there, like there was certain things that they would come in and they would consider doing. What kind of things would that be? Would that be the sort of focusing on a character, or would that be something more minute, like the way a shot was set up, that kind of thing?
The script pretty well drives that. And what I meant was, you didn't find anybody suddenly rewriting the script and deciding it was going to go in one direction or another. But there were emphases on individual characters. Directors felt in some cases it was better to spend more camera time on a particular position in the aircraft, or a particular mood or emotion that a character was going through, and that's fine. That's part of their art. And so the key was that at the bottom line, everybody felt really that we had to make it a smooth transition from director to director, and it all had to have the same feel, and they accomplished that, I think.
Off the back of the mention of the virtual on set technology, how did that kind of impact the way that you advised on set? So obviously, if an actor has a question about something, you can enlighten them, but did the fact that they could see the aircraft coming at them, that kind of thing, did that impact the way that you advised them?
Well, no, because I started with that sort of mentality in the basic training phase. And we talked about the dangers of flak and the dangers of enemy aircraft and what they presented. The difficulty of hitting one with a marksmanship with a 50 caliber A&M2 machine gun when both airplanes are moving in opposite directions. It's not like the old duck hunter lead thing. You've got to learn how to do this.
Yeah.
But there are always times, I think, when an actor will come to me and he'll say, Captain, I seem to be particularly worried about X, Y, or Z in this scene. Is that right? And sometimes I say, absolutely. You're a human being. and you're at risk, and of course you're thinking about that. Or there'd be times when I'd say, listen, no, forget that. Try to forget yourself. Think about the aircraft. Think about the mission. Think about the crew. Think about what little things you have to do, A, B, C, D, in a cockpit, and focus on that. Get that done. That'll be the right stuff.
Hello there, sorry to interrupt. I wanted to let you know that you can now join our supporting cast over on Patreon. As thanks for your support, you'll be able to help us pick films, submit questions for guests, have first pick on brand new and exclusive merch, and much more. Thank you for your support. Now back to the show.
I've watched it recently, and I wondered if you would have shown it to the chaps. There's a really great, I think it's 1943, 44, aerial waist gunnery video that was done by Warner Brothers, with Mel Blanc voicing a gunner who voiced
sure.
Bugs Bunny. Did you show things like that to them, like proper films?
Yeah, we did. We had.
Oh wow,
we had several of them. That we found. There was the Mel Blanc Bugs Bunny one, and there were several others with some goofy guy that the War Department in
those ones
put together as cartoons because they thought, let's not get too heavy here. The way to teach, these kids grew up reading comic books and the funny papers, and this is the way to teach them. So we had 5 or 6 that we showed, particularly in aerial gunnery. Some business about aircraft maintenance on the ground. We had a film. We had bomb loading on in a sort of a cartoonish presentation. So we found those things.
That's
and
great.
we did download them and actually show them as they did during basic training.
Yeah. Well, how were they
Very
received?
few of those people. Very few of the people knew who the hell Bugs Bunny was. But we got over that. How was
that received by the cast? Did they felt like they got a lot from those?
Yeah, I think so. I think they're like young men everywhere. The heavier you get, and the more you demand that they read and memorize. And we've all been through this in our school days. It's you're slave driving. But if you can lighten it up a bit, if you can show them that there's a humorous side to all of this, it communicates very well. And I think it did in our case.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Matt, you've got another Patreon question, I think.
I do. This one's from Paul Hicks, and he asks, how would you compare your experiences working on your first production, Platoon, to working on something like Masters of the Air? And he also asks, is Tom Hanks actually as nice in real life?
Okay, let me take them one by one. Look, when we did Platoon, it was my first real major production. The first time in which I had been allowed to do it my way, training the actors in full immersion and so on and so forth. So there were a lot of things I experimented with. Can I get away with this? Will this work? Will that work? Well, it worked when I was on active service. But will it work with actors? And it did. But in those days, I was refining the process. I was still trying to figure out what was the best way to do it, given the unusual circumstances that we were in. And over a period of about 50 more films that I did since Platoon, I was able to really refine it. And now it's known as, the Capt method. And everybody who works for me knows that method and exercises. So it's been a huge leap, not only in technology, but in the way we apply our method of prepping actors to get ready to do an individual story. And it doesn't make any difference what that story is. It could be the future, as we did in Starship Troopers, or it could be the ancient past, as we did in Alexander. So we've been able to refine and yet maintain flexibility in how we put these things together. And so there's been a great leap. And is Tom Hanks the kind of nice guy that everybody says he is? Yes, he is.
Thank God for that.
And I say that with great reverence, because Tom has been enormously supportive of the way we do things. He is an amateur World War II historian. He's interested in this stuff. He believes that, as we do, that one of the things we can do with entertainment, television, or motion pictures is to shine some long overdue and much deserved light on the men and women who wear our uniform and who put their lives on the line every day. So Tom is that kind of guy. Yes.
Oh, fantastic! And we're really looking forward to seeing if Greyhound 2 ever comes out, because we thought
I've
Greyhound
heard
was
a lot
great.
I've heard a lot about that, and Greyhound 1 was quite.
We loved it. We thought it was fantastic.
An interesting film to work on. So Tom tells me that Greyhound 2 is coming. So I've got my Navy uniforms broken out here and I'm ready to go.
Outstanding. That's what we like to hear. Yeah, confirmed. Nice. I mean, one thing that stands out to me is when we've spoken to you before, you've talked about how you like to include, small details and get things across in a human way as well. Were there any small details that you sort of managed to include in your advising? So, say an actor's looking for something to do in the background, or he wants take Crosby's his friend's snow globe.
Snow globe.
That was obviously from Crosby's own diaries, but those kind of small inclusions, were there any things that stood out to you that you wanted to get in there when you were advising?
Well, the character of Crosby pukes a lot.
He does, yeah.
He does,
so we had to work on upchucking appropriately. But when you're talking about background, I remember our previous conversation, and I said at the time that no detail is too small. And you've got to pay attention to what's happening in the background. And many directors up to this point don't care. Just make it busy. Get somebody doing something better.
Yeah.
Well, in the RAF bases that were used by American forces, the 8th Air Force in World War II, of course, the ubiquitous method of transportation was the bicycle. And so we had to, it was bicycles everywhere. And in fact, that was true. They rode bicycles everywhere around the hard stand, from one place to another in all of the bases. So we found a bunch of young men and women who could ride bicycles and let them go. And that was fun. We got great kick out of the females in the land army.
Yeah, that's great.
That was a great inclusion.
All that sort of thing. And they were
moving the cows through in the background. I thought that was really cool.
It adds a lot of depth.
It does, doesn't it? Just the inclusion of
that,
something like that.
And we even got some of them who were Yorkshire gals, and they've got that Yorkshire accent. And I absolutely love it. And so we wanted to say as much as we could.
Yeah.
So that was all good stuff. And I was very interested in the ground maintenance crews. There is a tendency in a story like this to stay in the airplane. And that's where the drama is. But so much of the success that the 8th Air Force units had in the ETO was because of dedicated maintenance guys, people who were on the ground working on those aircraft and patching holes and tuning engines and all that sort of thing. And we were very
fortunate amount of work when you think about it.
Yeah, we were very, very fortunate to have Raph Law portray a real character who was the maintenance chief for the Bloody 100 and a little mechanical genius. In those days, we were driving Model A's and Model T's, and every farm kid knew how to fix a tractor and all that sort of thing. And he was that kind of kid. But we wanted to spend as much time as we could, as the script would allow, the story would allow, to make sure that we acknowledged how hard that work was.
Yeah.
And we did. Yeah. Another thing that we really emphasized, and I'm not sure how UK audiences are going to take all of this, but there was a disconnect between the American approach to the bomber war and the RAF approach to the bomber war. The RAF
those scenes didn't go unnoticed. Bombing. That's for sure. Yeah.
The RAF believed that carpet bombing at night saved lives. And the Americans thought that, precision bombing from high altitude daylight was the best way to go. And that was argued vociferously both at the MOD and the American Pentagon about which way to go with this. And I said, we need to make sure we get that in there, and we did. And I thought that was a great thing. The other thing that I got a kick out of was we heard stories all the time from people at Thorpe Abbott's and other bases in East Anglia that told us about the kids. The kids were kids, and they loved bombers and big things and action and adventure, and they were all over the place, and they had to chase them off the airfield all the time. And I said, well, that's a cute thing. We need to make sure we get that, and we did.
Yeah,
and the inclusion of the kids makes it really human. It gives it a very, and the interactions with, Ref Law, they give it a real human element. I really like those sequences.
Yeah, going back to the mechanics, I really love that inclusion because they're seldom seen in movies and productions. And I love how this Master of the Air took its time out to give them time to do their jobs and show their jobs. And then you have Crosby's narration, and he reiterates it straight after saying, look, if it's not for them, we're not in the air, we can't do our jobs. And it's one of the things that I love the show for, is that it does show that it's this big family. It's not just the guys in the bombers, it's everyone on that airbase doing the job. And other things I love was just finally seeing things like mechanics dungarees and tankers jackets, and it's just sort of the array of costumes. There's the little details in there that you were talking about. They all come through.
Listen, the costumes were magnificent. And where the hell they found most of this stuff, I don't know. But if you looked at how a bomber crewman was dressed to go on a mission, and he had long underwear, and then he had the poopy suit that was an electric suit, the blue suit, and then he had coveralls over that, and then he had a jacket over that, and all of this had to plug into the electrical system of the aircraft. And I said, are we going to see any of this stuff? Well, we saw a little bit of it, but the point that the wardrobe people made, the costume designers, was that they need to feel this.
Yeah.
And I said, you're on my wavelength. That's
right.
Exactly
it's that immersion
right.
again, isn't it? Yeah.
That will affect their performance, and it did. But they did a magic job, the wardrobe people, especially research and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, we looked into the company that supplied a lot of the like the flight jackets and things like that, and the levels of detail they went in to do it. I think they made
original pieces as well, and all sorts, like original flying hats and stuff.
Yeah,
really
even
cool.
Like pearl grips on someone's M1911. It's such a small detail, but it adds so much to the character. We often talk on the show about characterization through costume, and I think people think in a war movie you can't do it because of uniforms, but you can, and Masters of the Air gets that, and these guys were young, they like their fashion, so some guys have got like the rough leather showing, some guys haven't, the crushed hats, things like that. It just adds so much more to the production. It's just something.
We found that and as we began to train and they began to wear this gear, I said, look, young men are individuals and they're in a uniform. Yes, I get that. But there are little touches that they'll always do, especially about the way they wear their hat and the way it's shaped, or a scarf. Those are things that are individual character elements, and they're true. I mean, all you got to do is take a look at the an air crew posed out in front of a B-17 in World War II, and you'll see all sorts of individuals. I said, go there.
Yeah.
If it works, we're going to let you have it.
How did you find wearing the air crewman's gear? Because I know I've seen you photos with, Seven Private Ryan, you're in the M41 stuff. In Platoon, obviously you got your third patterns on. Like, is that the first time you wore any of that stuff? Is it?
Yeah,
how does it rank in comfiness to everything else you've done in your
felt
career?
a little like a Michelin man, I mean, I had so much crap on me that I practically couldn't bend my knees. And of course, they were younger men than I am, but I think you get used to it, and the more you wear it, the more it bends with you, and you kind of wear it in like you would a catcher's mitt or something. It sort of shapes to your body.
Yeah.
And what occurred to me when I was wearing these electric suits and that sort of thing is, geez, what happens if suddenly this short circuits?
Yeah.
And in fact, we talked to several people who told me they did it constantly.
Wow.
The damn things would short circuit, and they'd get burns where the connectors were.
Wow.
Underneath the thing. So I don't think we specifically showed that, but we found out that actually happened.
Mm.
And of course, the sequences with at altitude and not having any gloves on and trying to handle a machine gun,
I was
the
going to
chamber
mention
of a
that.
machine
Yeah.
gun, you're automatically frostburned and you're useless at that point. We did show that. We wearing that stuff just as I did, just to see what it was like, was an experience.
How does it rate with all the uniforms you've worn? Is it one you'd want to do again, or?
No, probably out of all of them, the biggest pain in the ass was wearing all that stuff and trying to figure out how do they work like this.
Sure. What's your favorite uniform to wear? Like, what's your favorite things?
Well, there's a lot to be said for naked.
Sure.
But you don't get a lot of that unless you're doing Alexander or something. I guess the looser it is, and the less constricting it is, the more I'm happy with it.
Sure.
I think we try to overprotect sometimes in combat, and what happens is you limit mobility, which then becomes a serious liability. So I don't know, probably something between what we wore in Vietnam and what we ended up with in the desert.
So one thing we mentioned there was the handling of the gun without gloves on. And there's another scene in the episode that has just dropped when this is going to air. And it's the scene where one of the M2's cocking charger handles is shot off, and the guy grabs a spent case and he jams it in and uses it to cock the weapon. Was that in the script? Was that something the armor suggested, or was that something from you?
It wasn't in the original script.
Okay.
But it was in
that
later.
Felt like a Dale Dye thing to me.
I had a little to do with it. And at first we weren't sure that could happen. And then we got to talking to people and some armorers and that sort of thing. Said, yeah, if you can get something that will grip and hold it, but that bolt is extremely heavy.
Yep.
And it has an unlocking situation where you've got to pull the bolt operating rod handle down to unlock and then pull the bolt to the rear. If you can get something that will hold through that, it could be done. And the more we messed with it and made it happen, I said, yeah, that's pretty cool. And then we found some memoirs that mentioned it. That there were
amazing.
There were jury rigged things used all the time, and so we did that.
No, that's great. That'll if anyone gets rowdy about that now, we can say no.
I love that. I thought that was a great little thing because I've seen guys do it. Like I've seen mentions of it being done in the field, but never in the air. So I thought that's great. That makes complete sense.
But it's the same in the field as it is in the air. If you've got a weapon that's malfunctioned and you've got a brain in your head, a young man's going to look at that and say, shit, I got to figure this out. And he will. Somehow or another, he'll find a way to figure it out.
Yeah.
And it was the same then. It's the same now.
Of course. So how long are you on set then for Masters of the Air? When did you start? And how long were you involved for?
I guess I started I started prior to leaving the States.
Sure.
But I started research work on it in February, I think, of the year. And then we went to UK and got a great apartment. My exo and I lived in Eton, right across from the
lovely.
It's great.
Very nice.
But we went over in March, and then I was there till almost Christmas. But it was extremely difficult. And anybody who lived in UK at that point knows the difficulty of the great COVID panic.
Absolutely.
And that was frustrating. And I call them the COVID cops And we had more on the set, I think, at many times than we had grips and gappers.
I know.
Wow.
If you look at the credits at the end of the show, you can see there's at least a dozen names there under like
the
COVID marshal.
department.
COVID
Yeah,
marshals,
right.
Bigger
yeah.
than the wardrobe department. Yeah. And
Right.
I'm not going to.
It could have flown their own wing.
I'm not going to bore your audience with my opinions about the whole thing, but I will say this: there were times when it would, somebody would test positive for COVID, and they'd have to pull an actor out, and we'd have to scramble the schedule, and so on and so forth. And there were long lines to get just onto the set, and all the mask stuff. And anyway, it was frustrating. And the neat thing, in my view, is British film crews, who I have a lot of respect for and worked for plenty of times over the years. They took it in stride, and typical British stiff upper lip, as they demonstrated in World War II, and just said, okay, we got to do this. We got to do this. It's worth it. Let's go to work. But there were long delays just getting things rolling on a set on any day. And frankly, I think it took more time in the overall schedule to get it done because of these COVID precautions.
Yeah, of course. And obviously, I think a few sort of dates that were sort of mentioned here and there for dropping the show, obviously that got pushed back. So I think that's one of the reasons why we've waited so long for Master of the Air, because obviously with a massive pandemic halfway through shooting the show.
Yeah.
So it's something that can't be helped.
And listen, trying to get into UK out of the US was a bit of legislation and magic that had to be done just to get us cleared to go in and get to work.
Yeah, I bet it was.
We talked about things that you managed to get into the show and little nuances and that sort of thing. Was there anything that you wanted to get in but you couldn't kind of like get it in there because of production side of things?
It was really well balanced. The writers did a great job on the thing, frankly. I was afraid we wouldn't spend enough time with the gunners. I was afraid that we wouldn't spend enough time with the maintenance guys. I was afraid that we were going to short shrift a number of things, the flak farms and where were the Germans? I mean. What was it like to be on an anti-aircraft crew firing an 88, constantly? And we managed to get all that stuff in to some degree, whether it was lesser or greater degree. It kind of depended. And a lot of that we actually shot, but it didn't wind up in the, everything. Some things wind up on the cutting room floor, so to speak.
Naturally.
But when I look at it in balance, and I've seen it all now, when I look at it in balance, we at least got some taste of those things that had me worried. So I no longer worry about it. I think it's a pretty balanced picture of the experience of people flying bombers in the 8th Air Force.
Yeah. No, we think that too. We saw it in December. We're lucky to get a screener from Apple, and we love it. We're just loving it so far, and being able to, having seen it and then re-talk about it, it's just a joy. So Matt, are you?
I was just going to jump off that and say, so you mentioned there the flak crews. So we also, in addition to seeing the air crews, we also see some of the German flak crews, and we also see some Soviets and some Volkssturm and that sort of thing. What was your involvement in that? I assume was similar to the air crews, and you would have had to have done your own individual research for those kind of aspects as well.
Well,
what kind of process was that like?
I've got members of my staff who are kind of World War II German experts.
Oh, there you go. That's cool.
Yeah.
Wow.
John Whitby, who's a Brit and has worked for me quite a bit, and Laird McIntosh, who trained the Germans or helped me train the Germans for Band of Brothers. They were there, and they were very helpful. So we didn't have a lot of time with them, but we had a week or so before they were going to shoot that we could kind of mold them into that sort of accurate look at the Germans. And that was difficult when it got into the POW sequences, which are coming up. And
yes.
And so we had to, the Luft, the Luftstallags were different than other prisoner of war camps. And so we had to be very careful with that. And my German guys were tremendous. My German experts were really very good at that. But, you know, the details, sometimes the funniest damn things in details. We have several sequences. I'm just going to trip off the gun line here and talk about.
Absolutely. Go for it.
But here's an example. Brits eat differently than Americans do. You ever notice that?
We hold our knives and you put your knives down when you're eating. Yeah.
And so we have a lot of these sequences that took place in the Thorpe Abbott's mess hall. And at first they had it all British stuff. They had people in white coats and napkins over there. I said, no, we don't do that. I'll allow you to put tablecloths, but that's as far as we're going. We're not going to have little whisk brooms that, you know. So the interesting thing was I would go in and we'd be shooting a scene at which the guys are eating dinner or eating breakfast. And I could always tell the Brits. The Americans would cut their food and put their knife and do it the American way. And I would go over and say to the Brits, listen, you know, it's obvious that you're not eating in the American fashion. And they go, oh, what? There's no doubt. Yes, there is. And we'd have to show them. But that's kind of detail that I wind up screwing around with for hours. Finally, they would look at it and they say, well, I don't know why you do that. That's a silly way to eat. It's the American way to eat. Just do it that way. And so we would see those kind of things every day.
It is those small details that enrich something like that. And it is that small. And it's something that someone will know and someone will pick out on if you don't do it.
Yeah, of course.
Exactly.
And there'll be some stuff I missed. There's no question.
Oh,
I can't wait. My email will light up here.
Oh, yeah. Oh, there's been some takes this month. So my next question is, you played Sync in Band of Brothers. I wondered, was there at any point like the chance of maybe a cameo perhaps in this one?
Listen, I was desperate.
Could have been in the background in the pub.
Yeah.
I was desperate to get one. And there was a version of the scripts that had a visit by General LeMay.
Yeah.
Who was a big deal in the bomber force.
Curtis LeMay.
And I said, God, I want that. I want that. And but it's with this trilogy, it's the same reason that I couldn't get a piece of the Pacific. Is that my performance is Colonel Sink in Band of Brothers it absolutely identified me in the world of Spielberg and Hanks World War II. And they said, we can't put you in there. They'll say, what's Colonel Sink doing here?
Yeah.
And I thought maybe given the amount of time since Band of Brothers was out, that maybe I could get away with it. And I was really going to push for it until I read one version of the script. They cut the General Curtis LeMay piece, and I said, "Well, I'm screwed. That's it." So I didn't get in. I wanted to, but I couldn't get in.
Oh, that's a shame. we did scour scenes, looking in the background, saying, "Is Dale in there or not?" And so we had to ask just in case. I mean, of course, you must have seen it by now, but what do you think of the show as just a viewer?
I was so busy while we were shooting in the UK that I didn't have a lot of time to see dailies. And I often, in bouncing from set to set, as I frequently did, I said, my God, how's this all going to cut together? I don't know. It all looks scatterbrained to me. And I was afraid of that. I was afraid the continuity, the flow of the story throughout the series would be damaged. But I've seen it all now. And I got to tell you, that's not the case.
No.
The guy who cut this, and I give all credit to Gary Getzman, who works for Platoon with Tom Hanks. I give him full credit because he was a supervising editor, the guy who cut it. And every time I would complain or worry, Getzman would come up to me and say, listen, there's the film you shoot, and there's the film you edit, and then there's the film that you see. And I said, okay, I got it. And he was right. He was right. The editing was brilliant.
No, it is good, really good, and especially in episode 3. I I can't get over how good I think that episode is. One of the best hours of television I've seen. Maybe for just superb. As is the rest of the series. And Matt, anything else?
One last final question for me is: do you have a favorite scene from the show that you worked on?
There are several, I think, which really stand out to me. I like the sequence with Clevin in the cockpit, and the B-17 is getting the crap knocked out of it, and they're about to go down, and everybody wants to bail out. We got to leave this thing. It's just not going to make. And Clevin says, "We're going to sit here and we're going to take it."
Yes.
And I thought, that's the spirit. And I love that one. And then the stunt guys were absolutely brilliant. The UK stunt guys that did this piece with us. And they staged this fire on the interior of a fuselage. And I said, my God, somebody could get killed doing this. But lo and behold, it was based on an actual incident that happened in which the oxygen system blew up. And
that's that amazing sequence in episode 2, isn't it? Yeah, I remember that scene.
And there were 2 stunt guys in that.
Wow.
And they went, ass all over a tea kettle, getting out of there. And I said, whoa. And I said, if there's one sequence that shows you how brutal it was, look, a lot of people, when we do infantry stuff, people think, well, that's eyeball to eyeball with the enemy, and there's very little that's more frightening than that. And those guys in the air, they're disconnected. They never see the enemy. Well, they don't have to. They just have to see the damage that the enemy can do. And that sequence where the aircraft blows up on the interior brought that home to me. So there are a bunch of scenes that stand out, but those 2 kind of stick in my mind.
Very powerful. But Butler in that sequence is everything you'd want in a captain, isn't he? He's trying to get his men back and sit here and take it. It's a great line, and he delivers it the exact way you'd want as well.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah,
a lot of hard to act with the eyes, just the eyes with the cockpit,
of course,
the thing, and that's something that I love about it.
And we had everybody had misgivings. Everybody who wasn't Spielberg, Hanks, me, and Gary Gutzman had misgivings about, it's eye acting. How are they going to do it? I said, they're fine. And the first time you take that mask off of one of them just to show their face, and the audience knows they're at 10,000 or greater, you're going to blow credibility all to hell. And don't do that. So we had some arguments, but finally we said, all right, that's the way it's got to be. They would not have flown except momentarily without that mask. And that's the way it went.
I suppose as an actor, as long as you're doing the full, gamut of the facial expressions that you would expect for a scene underneath the mask, the eyes will convey everything that is needed anyway.
Yeah,
because that's what we tend to look at, when we're looking at someone either on screen or in person. We're looking at the eyes.
Eyes are the window to the soul. And
of course, absolutely.
That's what you get.
We are so glad you could join us to chat about the show because, when we had you on a few months ago, you gave us that little tidbit of talking about it, and that really excited us about what the show was going to be. And then to get the chance to watch the entire show before it aired, and then now that we're doing weekly reviews of it, it's been such a fascinating sort of progression, moving from being able to finally talk about the show. And it's great to get your insights on all the minute details that went into making it.
It's dynamite here in the States. And I understand it's doing really well in Great Britain. So we'll see how it goes. Keep me posted. But my initial assessment here is we got a hit on both sides of the pond.
I think so. I think it's pretty safe to say that. Yeah.
I think having watched it all, it will stand the test of time, just like Band of Brothers did, I think. And Pacific.
Give it time.
Yeah.
Everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Fighting on Film. You can follow us on the socials. X, Twitter, Instagram, whatever you like. And we'll catch you again next time for some more war movie reviews. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thanks for joining us, Dale, and thanks to everyone for listening as well.
Thanks, guys.